It's a fear of being seen to fail, I think, is where fear of failure can come from. And when you're away, you're more detached from the people whose judgment you may be worried about, if that makes sense. I've always kind of tried to think, like, why exactly was it that it was so much easier when I was detached? Like, what is it about the detachment itself?
Hello, and welcome to the Randall Osché Podcast, where honest conversations take the lead. Each week, we sit down with entrepreneurs, artists, thinkers, and change makers to unpack how they got from there to here and what they learned along the way. Real stories, no filters, lessons earned through experience, so you can take what's useful and leave the rest. Whether you're tuning in during your commute, workout, or while making dinner, we're glad you're here. So take a seat, relax, grab a cup of tea, and join in the conversation. Now, let's get into this week's episode.
John Hodgson, owner of Bright Dynamics, a recruitment agency where they focus on direct search for pre-sales positions at enterprise technology organizations. John, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. If I left anything out in that brief intro, I know there's a lot more to you than a couple sentences. Feel free to add anything and give a bit of a self-introduction if you'd like.
Randall, so nice to be here with you. Thanks for the invitation. A great introduction. I think all I would add is that the reason, or what I most love about being a recruiter is, from a company's perspective, anybody who's run a team knows the importance of, the difference that your team make, the individuals that make up the team make. And anyone that's run a pre-sales team knows how hard it can be to find individuals that really make the difference. And so you're bringing so much value to customers. And then at the same time, for individuals, it's so nice when you get the email 6 months later, a year later from an individual that's just really thankful for having helped them to make the move. So just to add that.
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple points I want to make sure we spend plenty of time on. I'm always really intrigued with people who have set out and started something on your own. So if I'm using the term agency correctly, like Bright Dynamics is your agency that you started in 2014.
Correct.
So why don't we start there? I think it's as good a place as any of what did life look before that. It's going to be a complex question, so feel free to take it where you want it. But what did life look like before Bright Dynamics when you started in 2014? Sort of what prompted you to start your own agency? Take it wherever you want to go.
Sure thing. Well, you know how history always has history before that, and so you can go back forever. I had the tendency to do that, so I'm going to do my best not to do that, not to give you too much context. So before setting up, I was in London working in-house at SAP, and my now ex-wife, but my wife at the time, and I we'd spent many years kind of working, then going from periods of travel and then working. And so we were taking a huge chunk of time off, like 9 months off. And the idea was to go back to SAP. My boss said I could go back as a contractor. That was the plan. And then we went off. And what's nice about travel sometimes is it kind of takes you away from the everyday realities and the everyday problems and all that sort of stuff. And you get a bit more positive and a bit more confident with your thinking. And I think at the time I was reading a book by Tim Ferriss called The 4-Hour Workweek, which is quite well known, or was at the time. And I think a combination of reading that and again, being that bit separated, I just thought, hey, I'm going to get back. I've got some money in the bank still, get back and give it a go. My parents, my dad ran a business for a long time, small business. My mum was a freelance consultant. And so it always felt like at one point I wanted to start something up by myself. I didn't have any great kind of aspiration for it to be, an empire. I think it was more of and this is very Tim Ferriss, very kind of, more like a kind of a lifestyle business. And then we worked with agency partners at SAP, and I'd seen enough to say I can definitely do a good job here and be more than competitive. And so when I came back, I took a leap of faith and started the business.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. Really looking to get into this. So I'm also a big fan of Tim Ferriss. I've probably read The 4-Hour Workweek a couple of times, listened to it on Audible a couple of times as well. And one of the inspirations of doing this was Tim Ferriss and his podcast. I just was listening to another one of his episodes, or he was being interviewed, and he was talking about a reflection point for him of whether or not he wanted to continue to do the podcast and why. And it's the same sort of where I land as well. I would want to be having these conversations anyways. So why not record them and then put them out there and provide the benefit of this conversation to whoever wants to listen? So there's no downside for me as I see it. It just takes a little bit of extra time and a couple like subscriptions to the likes of Riverside FM to be able to record it. But you had mentioned I think travel does, like anytime you can remove yourself from the situation. I don't know if the proper terminology is you become numb to what you're doing, right? When you have the routine, when you wake up, commute to work, go to work, you do the same thing every day. That's just what life becomes. And then you sometimes don't realize what you're doing or what you're missing out on. But when you're able to remove yourself from that for a period of time, it happened to me in my career. It's just like, I do this. Like, how is this? Is this how I want to live my life? I was able to, years ago, maybe like 2018 or so, I was commuting 2 hours a day round trip to work. It was unplanned, but I had like 2 vacation trips planned in the month of July. And so for the month of July, I worked 4 days, and just the way holidays fell and my travel fell. And then after that month, I was just like, I had removed myself from the situation long enough to be able to reset and look at it objectively and be like, this commute is brutal. Like, I got back and like, I do this, like I'm missing out on so much. This is 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week. That comes out to months per year. I'm in my car, and you can only listen to Tim Ferriss on Audible and so many podcasts so much to make best use of that time. So I certainly understand, and that like really resonates with me. As far as like the entrepreneurial side of you, I'm sure that you had mentioned that your mom was a freelancer, your dad had owned a business. I'd be curious to know what business your dad had owned, and then maybe what sort of like dinner table lessons you took away from the experience with them that helped influence your entrepreneurial journey yourself, or maybe some of the lessons you learned from those conversations or being around them that has impacted how you run your business.
Yeah. So first of all, it's really interesting everything you've said there. One thing I would add as well about the detachment is I think it's almost not a fear of failure. It's a fear of being seen to fail, I think, is where fear of failure can come from. And when you're away, you're more detached from the people whose judgment you may be worried about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of tried to think like, why exactly was it that it was so much easier when I was detached? Like, what is it about the detachment itself? I mean, it sounds like from your example that it's also a case of sometimes you're just in such reactive mode, you don't have time to think anyway, and it takes a bit of space to be able to do that. So to your question, I can give you a tidbit. So my dad, he ran a publishing business, and it's incredible. The business wound up a few years ago. He's deep into his 70s now, and he's sort of run a small business in that industry. It was a really difficult industry to be working within because it was going through so much change with the internet and effectively a kind of like a dying industry. And he said, one of the things that I really liked, he said that it's a question of not making big changes with innovation and as things develop. It's a question of just making a small change every day, just innovating a little bit every day. And that's how you move and change with the times. Because I asked him once, how did you manage to survive for so long in such a difficult industry? So that was interesting. My mum was a freelance consultant for like public health, but she had to win a lot of business, and she went through periods where she would have to win business. My dad as well. There was a period where a couple of clients didn't pay, and we had to go on an economy drive in the house, that sort of thing. So yeah, those are the memories that I have. But I think more than anything else, for our parents, sometimes you just look at their path as a very viable path for yourself, if that makes sense. And if you've seen them do it, then it feels normal that you would do it. You know, if your parents went to university, it feels much more normal to go to university than if they didn't, for example.
Right. And I think, once you get out of whatever your standard is, right? Like say your parents went to university, or your parents were entrepreneurs, or if your parents worked in factories, having the different perspectives, or say your friend's parents, right? Say you had 3 friends growing up, and then the parents did different things and you were close with those 3 friends. Those insights help inform and educate you, and then later inform your decision-making ability of what do I want to do? How do I want to live my life? But if you only have like one set of inputs, it makes it much harder to understand, one, like how the world works, and then 2, to make an informed decision about what you want to do as well.
Yeah.
You were at SAP. You took, forget what do you call it on LinkedIn?
It can be a travatical.
It's travatical. Okay. I like that. You took a
I
sabbatical.
think I might have sabbatical, but
Yeah, you do have sabbatical.
I heard recently the term sabbatical, and I thought I've got to change my LinkedIn.
Yeah, we're going to use that.
Yeah, sabbatical, the new one.
Sabbatical.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that for a little bit too, and then we'll get back to like Bright Dynamics. I guess
Sure.
we'll go in chronological order here.
Yep.
How were you able to, and I know you have done this twice in your career, at least that's what LinkedIn says, but how were you able to negotiate or work with your employer? And I know you said like the idea was you were working at SAP, you would take your sabbatical and then come back and work for them as a contractor. Things happen, we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But how did you have the confidence or have the idea to say, hey, the time is right for me. I want to go have some time off, extended period of time, 9 months. I want to go travel and have broker that conversation between you and your employer at the time.
Yeah. So, okay, on a practical level, all you can do is explain the situation and hope that you've done a good enough job and that there's a need for your job when you get back. And generally speaking, for an organization, if they know an employee is a good employee, fully trained up, you can hit the ground running, they know what they've got, it's very attractive to bring people back because it's hard to find strong performers. So you've got to kind of hope that your performance is good enough and that there's the need. And that's all you can do. So it's 4 times actually I've made this move. So the first time I had a job lined up and I asked them to wait for me for a few months. And then the second time as well. And then after that, it was just a case of, taking the leap of faith and having a pot of cash for when you get back. And this was the time, it's a bit different now. The job market was such where you could feel confident that you'd be able to get a job. And I think that's all it is. It's just a bit of a leap of faith. It's funny because a lot of people really aspire, and it's more common now to take time to travel and so on. But a lot of people aspire to it and say they would love to do it, but they're fearful of precisely that. And there's actually nothing to be that scared of, because changing jobs when you have a skill set that's in demand and, you're a proven professional isn't that difficult, or at least it wasn't then.
Yeah. I've listened to I think Tim Ferriss talks about this in his book, 4-Hour Workweek, about how to influence the scenario where an employer would allow you to work remotely from somewhere else. And the 4-Hour Workweek, for context, I think was published in 2007. So a lot has changed since then. But in the book, he talks about how to, just do it and then ask for, in one of the scenarios, just go somewhere, work remotely. After you've proved yourself, ask for permission later that you want to make this permanent change, right? And I imagine the same philosophy could apply to taking a sabbatical as well. But a lot of the stuff that you hear online or that you read online, I would say contradicts your practical explanation. And sometimes I think that we just overcomplicate stuff. So I guess this is my long way of saying, there's a lot of stuff that we hear and read that there's a magical way to position or ask your employer, do this in this step and then say it this way and not say it that way. Don't have an honest conversation. And I've probably, for different reasons, taken in that information. And I've probably, for different points in my career, for different things I was aspiring to do, have tried to, not just offer the practical explanation of, this is where I'm at, this is where I want to be. How do we make that happen? At this point in my career, or maybe it's my age and not, where I'm at in my career, I just don't have the bandwidth or energy or desire to engineer the ideal conversation or troubleshoot it from the other person's perspective. I just want to be able to have a practical conversation. This is where I'm at. This is what makes sense to me. This is what I want to do, whatever that is. What are your thoughts on that? And am I going to be able to do that at this organization? So I guess the question there is, how did you get to the point of, one was engineering the perfect conversation ever cross your mind? And then 2, how did you just get to the point of having the practical conversation with SAP of, this is where I'm at, this is what I want to do. Will you have me back in 9 months?
Yeah, I don't think so. I've always towards just being transparent and having open conversations. And I think that when you try to engineer things too much, people pick up on that and it takes away from kind of not authenticity, but I'm a big believer in upfront conversation. In this instance, actually, it was lucky because it was a very busy period. So there was nothing beyond that. I think from my perspective as well, I think something that's important is that whatever you're doing, you need to want to do what you want to do, more than what you're walking away from, if that makes sense. And for me, I'm doing this no matter what, and if I'm able to come back, then great. I was going to say one more thing as well, which has now escaped me. Yeah, we'll come back.
What is about the direct conversation? I mean, to me, I'm a very practical person. I think I'm a very practical thinker. I think in terms of effectiveness and efficiency, and it's not very effective or efficient for me to spend 8 hours thinking of and engineering this conversation, or even if I have critical feedback to give to somebody, I understand I don't want to come across as a jerk, but I also don't have a desire to soften it.
Well, really appreciate that. I think even if you disagree with what the person's saying to you, you appreciate just knowing where you stand and what their position is.
Yeah. I mean, it's just maybe as a cultural thing, or I don't know how we got to this point, but I just want to be able to, again, you can be direct without being rude about it. But I think the expectation, at least in America, is to soften the blow you're about to give. And we're all adults. Just treat me like an adult. If I did something bad, tell me I did something bad. If I also think it's bad after you told me, I'll try to improve. And if the person doesn't try to improve, then one, you probably shouldn't be around them. 2, they probably shouldn't be an employee. 3, manage your time interacting with that individual accordingly.
Right. This is a huge problem, by the way, when it comes to interview feedback, because candidates, especially those that are actively looking, really want just genuine, unsugar-coated feedback so that they can learn from it, and move forwards. And I think that managers, recruiters, everyone really struggle to give that. When it's specific hard, stuff, you weren't able to travel enough, or you didn't have Java development experience or whatever, then it's okay. But when you just didn't nail it here, or we were concerned about this aspect, or, when it's to do with someone's approach or personality or how they interviews, then there are very few managers and recruiters that give genuine feedback there. And it's tough because it's what people want to hear. And that's not the US thing. I think that happens, the Western world over.
Yeah.
Conundrum for me.
Yeah. One of the things in my experience, I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been the interviewee plenty of times. I've been the interviewer plenty of times. And where I land on it is I think the first point is offering feedback. And if you have a candidate you didn't hire and they request feedback, I think it's your obligation as the interviewer and as a good human to offer it. So many times candidates leave the interviewing cycle, they don't get the job, and they don't receive any feedback. If I get to the point as an interviewee and I'm doing the interview, or even if I'm delivering a work product for them so they can see what I'm doing, I think you can afford some time to think about what went well or what didn't go well and advise me as such. And then to your point, don't sugarcoat it, right? If I did so poorly that I shouldn't be trying to get this job and I should aim for a different position in a different industry, I would like to know that sooner than later, rather than setting my sights on this position that's an executive role or XYZ, where I'm just never going to get it. Please tell me. So, but I don't think that that's how it works, at least not yet.
No. It's a big issue. It's a big issue because the incentives is the problem. Once a company's decided no against a candidate, they have no incentive to provide decent feedback beyond, candidate experience is important, and people will talk about the importance of candidate experience, but it's a lot of talking and less, because if they wanted to sort it out, they could do, but it happens in very few organizations.
Yeah, I think it happens. I've had a ton of interviews and I always try to seek feedback, and probably less than 5% actually will say, here's what went well, here's why we didn't hire you. And I've built relationships with hiring managers who have interviewed me, and we've built a professional relationship post that interview. And then just because we're on a call, talking shop, then they all have offered me genuine feedback because we built rapport and relationship after the interview cycle. But they've shared it with me. But again, that was removed from the actual process, right? It was months later.
I think a solution to this, I know we're going to put it back, but I think a solution to this could be that if a candidate applies and if they know, I think that it's fair for a company just to give them a standard rejection email. It's not realistic to provide information to everyone. If they could, great. Maybe AI could do that, but I think that's fine. I think if they've been rejected by the recruiter at the recruit stage, I think some written feedback's okay, because a recruiter's effectively screening. And so it normally would be something hard skills related that you can transmit by email. But once they've spoken to a manager, I think that on receiving the rejection email, they should be offered like a Calendly link of just, hey, do you want to grab some time? And it can be set up. So for a manager, it's a 2-hour period on a Friday when they're doing their admin and they've got a bunch of calls, just jump on the calls and talk through. And most candidates, well, I don't know, maybe 50% would go for it. It depends. Some candidates don't want to hear the feedback. Some candidates know what happened so it will be a reduced amount. But I think that that's an easy solution and the benefits may not be tangible, but it's one of those ones where it could just at any point in the future, especially if a candidate's like a silver medalist, as they say, they've got right through, it's been them and another individual. They've been genuinely really considered because they've been, gone through hours of interview process. Then, spending 5 minutes to give them feedback and have them desiring to rejoin a process in the future makes complete sense.
Yeah, and especially this is the first time I've heard silver medalist candidate, so I'm gonna use that. But especially for silver medalist candidates, because if you've recognized that there's talent there and maybe it's the right fit but not the right time, then I imagine that you want to keep those people in your orbit. You want to be around them. And if they don't know that they were the silver medalist, they're going to move on, forget about you probably. So I think that's practical advice.
I sometimes get it when I approach people and they'll say, I'm not going to talk to that company because I spoke to them 3 years ago and they didn't give me any feedback and I chased it and they didn't give me any.
Yeah.
And they're great candidates,
Yeah, doing stuff in spite of themselves. So getting back to, I guess, Bright Dynamics, you... I'll say negotiate with SAP to take some time off, plan to come back to be a contractor for them. I suppose it didn't work exactly that way when you came back from your travel, and that was the genesis of Bright Dynamics. So tell me a little bit about like the upstart of that and maybe like, were you excited? Were you, stressed? Tell me about that period.
All of the above. And I've just remembered actually before when we talked about the talking with your boss, I think there's no way that you can ask if it's possible. You need to say, this is what I'm planning to do. Would this be possible? But make it clear. Asking for permission is not going to work in terms of negotiating, 6 months off.
Yeah. And I think you also, if anybody's listening to this, you have to be a performer too, right? If you're not performing and you go to your boss and say, hey, I'm going to take a sabbatical, they're going to say, great, see you when you come back. And your position's going to be gone. But if you're a key player, if you're a performer and you do what's required of you, that could be an interesting conversation. But if you're not performing, they'll probably be happy to see you go on your way.
It's definitely a prerequisite. So to answer your question, very, very excited, obviously nervous, a whole bunch of different emotions. I think the biggest one is just motivated, just really wanting to go at it.
What were some practical steps that you took to go from not having an agency to having an agency?
So first of all, it was my intention from the moment I got back. So beyond the boring practical steps of working out how to actually open a company and that sort of thing, practical steps were talking to all of my ex-colleagues at SAP. Some of them were still at SAP. Some of them moved on to other companies and the rest of my network. Previous to SAP, I've worked in Spain. So that network wasn't so relevant. So pretty much my launching network was the SAP one, but SAP is a great network to have because there are so many people. That included SAP itself and then companies like Box, for example. This will be a blast of the past to you, BlackBerry, and a few others. And so I was, first of all, the market, I was very fortunate with the market. The market was very buoyant. And then secondly, about 75% of the individual colleagues I've worked with before were really keen and enthusiastic to help, which was awesome. Some of them said, okay, that's fine. Just, come back when you've got a bit of experience under your belt. And I can say to my boss that, that it's not just my friend that I want to help out, but the majority were keen to get going and I'll be forever thankful to them.
That's awesome. How do the economics of running your own recruiting agency work? How do you go to a company, say like SAP, and position yourself of I can help you get top candidates? How does that process work?
So it depends who you're talking to. Okay. So from the perspective of SAP, they have a lot of agency partners already for different locations, for different types of positions and so on. And so it's really down to the recruiters. So each recruiter has access to internal sourcing teams and then to an agency, and they can effectively choose which agency they want to partner with. And so because I had a good experience recruiting for SAP roles from when I was at SAP and knowledge of the organization and basically was well placed to deliver for them, if that makes sense, then initially 2 of their recruiters plugged me into positions. You fill those positions, you get a good reputation, both with the business and with other recruiters. And then all of a sudden emails come in and you're being asked to work on other roles as they come up. So basically there's no, in the economics, at least, well, I probably shouldn't talk publicly about the economics with specific companies, but there's 2 models with recruiting. So there's a contingency model, which is no hire, no fee. So effectively you're a hired gun that goes out. And if you can help a company make a hire, then the fee is a percentage of their first year's salary. Or there's the retained model, which is much more collaborative, where a company is paying a retainer up front. So it's normally 30% of the overall fee, and then another amount of submission of candidates, and then the full amount once the role is filled. So back then, the majority of the companies that I was working with were on the contingency model. So the economics are, do a good job for the customer and you'll be rewarded both in terms of a fee, but then also in terms of ongoing work. Because what companies really remember is the roles that you filled and the people that you've helped them hire. That's what sticks.
I've worked at a company as well that has had recruiters like internally and an HR department, but then we had also solicited the help of independent individuals like you to help us find candidates. What do you offer that an internal like recruiter at an SAP, as an example, wouldn't be able to do? Is it bandwidth? Is like just the network that you have? What is the value that you offer that the people that are actually hired at the organizations can't do themselves?
Yeah, you're very perceptive, because basically that's those, when you boil it down, those are the 2 things. So I specialize in pre-sales. So I've now been, spent 10 years helping companies hire pre-sales roles. So I've obviously spoken to a lot of people over that period, and I've built out a strong network. And so often for positions, you tend to repeat business in the same areas. So, if you were to come to me looking to hire a procurement pre-sales professional in Germany, I've spoken to all of them already, sort of thing. So that helps, and you have that network. So that's important. I think also knowing what good looks like is important. For example, within pre-sales, often it can be by less experienced recruiters, they can think it's effectively like a sales role, if that makes sense. And it's definitely not sales. It's within the sales org, but it's very different. So that kind of expertise helps as well. And there's more that I could layer on top of that. And then from a bandwidth perspective, absolutely as well. When I was at SAP, I think it was 135 hires in the last year, which is just crazy. And, and you don't have the bandwidth because it takes time to build out a proper search. And so as an external recruiter, you work on a lot less roles and you're able to do that. And also recruiting tends to come in waves for companies as well. So often there are periods where they're, really snowed under and need that kind of external help.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break from today's episode. If you're enjoying the conversation, take a second to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you're tuning in. We'd really appreciate it. You can also find us on Instagram at Randall Osché. That's RANDALLOSCHE. And check out more at podcast.randallosché.com, including show notes and other resources from today's episode. All right, back to the conversation.
Question, sort of related. You had mentioned before, like circa 2014, the job market was very buoyant. What's your sense on the job market? We're recording this beginning of September 2025. So presently, what would be your take on the job market today?
Right. Okay. So the last 3 years have been incredibly difficult. I think people would have to be living under a rock if they work in SaaS to not notice that. It's been getting progressively better. And that reflects in, for example, the company's key metrics in terms of revenue and just in terms of what you can feel. At the moment, it's feeling even more positive. I would say it's about 60%, 70% maybe back to where it was kind of pre-COVID. There's what changes as the different areas. Obviously, there's a lot of hiring with AI. There's a lot of money there's a lot of VC money that's gone into AI startups, and they're using that to build out sales teams and to hire. Vendors seem to be doing okay from like a revenue perspective. There's pipeline and then you need to hire to help fill that pipeline. So it's definitely improving. I think so. SE leaders are being asked, not all of them, but I think a lot have been asked to say, hey, what can you do with AI? How can we be more efficient? Doing more with less seems to have been, the market's better, but there were some fundamental shifts that happened. And one was from, growth at all costs to rule of 40 and to be more financially responsible. And as a part of that, AE to SE ratios are changing. For example, patients coming in and they're being asked to do what they can with AI. So that's kind of hampering things a little bit, if that makes sense. And then from an agency perspective, it's harder. There needs to be more pain and more of a business case to be able to justify the expense of working with an agency than there was previously.
Yeah, that's interesting. Not to get too off track here. What's your thoughts on the focus on like AI? I think AI is great. I think it's another tool in the toolbox. I don't foresee, and I haven't experienced where it's going to eliminate jobs. At least I haven't seen it. I think it has proven to me that it is very useful, and some of the tasks that I use it for reduced my hours that I would have to invest in that project at least by half. So I can work on twice as many projects, or that it's going to be twice as good. But for what I do, it can't do my thing. It can't replace me. It can help me do what I need to do and cut down on the time it requires and probably provide a better work product at the end. But it can't eliminate me as a person, at least not yet, from what I understand. And my other sort of thought on this is, in order to have an effective, say, AI strategy, I think that you need to have effective leadership. The leadership needs to be forward thinking and needs to be strategic. And one of the things I have experienced as my career is I think the leaders that possess that are the exception and not the rule. Yeah. So I am not bullish on companies implementing AI to the effective degree that it's going to eliminate people in positions, because they try to always implement other things in the past, and those have failed, right? So I think certainly some companies will, and I'm sure those companies will use it so effectively that it eliminates people in positions. But again, I think that's the exception, not the rule. I think the rule would be people are going to try, organizations are going to try and then fail. I mean, maybe that's a jaded perspective.
No. So I think, I'm just thinking now as you talk through. So I think I agree with your position. What's interesting is you look at LinkedIn or the internet and you get either people that are doing everything with AI, that are so 4x in their performance and this, that, the other, and they've got the N8 diagrams or whatever. And it gives you just total a feeling of inadequacy in terms of how come I can't achieve this. To other people, there's this kind of, obviously the fear around jobs and so on. And so there's both sides of that, which comes out because that provokes strong emotions. But then you speak on a one-to-one basis and everyone just seems like, the kind of the hype cycle, you get that kind of trough of disillusionment. Everyone seems to be kind of entering that phase at the moment, or just a realization that it's not this kind of be all and end all. And I'll give you an interesting anecdote. So I was talking with a global pre-sales head who I have a lot of time for and is super switched on, and he's very innovation oriented. He basically said, I run in a bunch of AI programs, but I just don't see it working. He said, obviously I have to champion them because I don't want to be seen as a Luddite internally. And so he's, smart enough to know that that's where the eyes are and the attention is at the moment. And I'm sure he's given it his best go. But, off record, he's saying and he talked about a trial they'd done that hadn't worked at all. So that kind of trough of disillusionment definitely seems to be there. I think that sometimes I used to listen to this podcast. It talked about how far reaching the impact of the internet was. And it's incredible, all the things that the internet's kind of created, And I think the same will be true for AI. It just takes a long time to play out, before difference comes into play and where it can't make a difference comes into play. So that will play out. But I think the arc of technology has always been a new technology comes along. People are fearful in terms of jobs. There's some level of disruption, but it's not too bad. but, new jobs are created from it. We all collectively get richer.
I think that's very well said. Yeah.
But what's interesting is, so for example, I'm 46 now. I run a small business. I have a family to support. I've just been through 3 difficult years with the market. And so you feel sensitive to it. I remember studying at school, the Luddites, and thinking, God, they were all crazy, like they're just so backwards. And then, you suddenly find yourself with exactly the same thought patterns, which come from fear of the worst case scenario. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know what a Luddite is.
So the Luddites, you're testing my 17-year-old history. So the Luddites so during the Industrial Revolution, the Luddites, they went from, lots of manual work to creating machines and automating. And the Luddites were a bunch of workers that would just go and smash the factory up.
Oh.
In a way of protesting and kind of this kind of desperate hope to stop the inevitable kind of happening. So yeah, and it's happening now, apparently. So there are people that are disrupting AI projects within organizations.
Ooh.
You don't know what's true and what's not true. It's hard to tell, but it's a natural human reaction. You can understand.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the arc of technology, I think you did say that very well. And you think back to like, the BlackBerry or the iPhone or even like CDs to music being in like iTunes and all of that, right? Like the world is still spinning. But I think the implementation of AI first strategies or technology, it's going to require, and I guess maybe this is the first time I'm thinking about it, it's going to require a lot of time, energy, effort, and strategy to do it effectively. Yeah. And what I have heard, read, and seen, I don't think people are talking about that part of it enough or at all. I think it's just like a magic solution, implement AI, and then make us better. But they're missing the front end of that, of strategically, where do we want to do it? What's the runway we have to do this? What result do we want to see from it? Instead, it's just more of a, let's throw all these AI applications against the wall, see what sticks, and then hopefully we improve our bottom line by 40%. And like I don't see that that's going to happen for the vast majorities of companies.
Yeah, I think experimentation is good. And, the nature of experimentation is that things will fail and won't work, and that's fine. The question is, what will come out of the end in the wash? There was at the MIT study, the 95%. But what was interesting there, so 95% of projects have failed, okay? But what was interesting there was that there's a difference between back office related projects and front office. So AI would seem is really good at automating stuff like customer service or processes that are a bit more predictable. But when you get front office, which would include recruiting and include sales, dealing with people, there's so much variance and context and that sort of thing that it's a lot more complicated. So maybe we'll see it there. I think, for example, customer service, I use ChatGPT. This is a stupid example, but I use ChatGPT for any technical question I have about any application or anything, and it gives you pretty good answers. So surely, with a bit of fine tuning for a company's specific processes and so on, it can't be that hard for it to be really good. But if I was like ChatGPT, it definitely couldn't sell to me.
Right.
Yeah,
agreed. To get back on track here a little bit, one of the things that I think is important to people, especially as a candidate, there's certainly probably candidates, you've met them, like, I need a job to have a job, or I want a better job, right? There are probably 2 different scenarios there.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like the benefits and why people would leave one organization for another, a very specific question here. How is paid time off or remote work and or global mobility policies important to candidates that you work with?
So the PTO depends on the location. So for example, in Germany, it's really important. In those kind of sensible Central European countries, it's very important. So remote has become very desirable. It's the first things people would ask is around the remote side of things and the ability to move, to work abroad. A little bit less so recently. I think that there was a point where everyone kind of realized that was possible, which is amazing, by the way. And I think there's a realization now that, only 20% of companies will do that. And so it's becoming less of a demand. But then there are people that if someone's in a remote situation, they won't accept going back to the office most often.
And this is my opinion, and I've also read some research on this as well, but allowing people to work remotely gives you better candidates, right? Instead of just limiting your candidate pool to people in one geographic location or one country or one city, you have a global pool of people that you can pull from, or you have a countrywide pool of people you could pull from, not just one city like Denver, Colorado, or Madrid, Spain, right? You have like the rule of numbers, you have a larger pool of people, larger talent to select from. So in your experience, the companies that offer remote work, depending on whether that's internationally remote or domestically remote, are you able to source better and stronger candidates?
100%. Yeah, you've nailed it. I mean, for example, I'm working for a role now that's basically based out of the Bay Area, and it's the hottest, and they need to be in the office in San Jose 4 times a week. And so that reduces the candidate pool to 30 minutes from the office. And there's obviously in an incredibly hot talent market. And if you compare that to the whole of the US, obviously that opens up so many possibilities. So it's not that the people in San Jose are saying, well, I want to work remotely. It's just that there's so many people out there that are working, in locations where they would have to work remotely. But yeah, no, it makes a huge difference. It's night and day. And some companies use it as a strategy to be able to hire better. I think the problem is that it's been more of a mandate from the very top in terms of back to work, and we need to collaborate together and we can't. I think some of it is around kind of narrative. This idea, that kind of things seem to swing, because it can't be that all companies or most companies come to the same conclusions at the same time. And then also they're paying expensive leases on offices that are sat empty.
I've been saying that for years. They got to justify the expense. They signed a 5-year commercial lease at the beginning of the pandemic, and like, hey, we want to get use out of this. I mean, I can understand it. I don't have to agree with it, but I understand it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, So to answer it, 100%. It's definitely easier.
What's sort of the nuance, if any? I'm not very educated on this matter, but I suppose I'm seeking additional information on it. So if somebody's hired to work remotely, like in the United States, their offer letter states hired remotely, United States, or wherever your city is. Now, I haven't seen anything where companies would preclude somebody from moving around like in the United States, but I have been aware that companies don't want you to take your quote unquote remote job and work remotely from another country, go international with it. So maybe just talk to me a little bit about that from your experience of maybe personal experience of being an employee or companies and how they view domestic remote versus international remote.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this came out of COVID when people were just moving around everywhere and legal departments got involved and finance departments got involved. So I think there are 3 things. So number 1 is, what does your boss think, or your direct org, in terms of how well you can do your job remotely from either anywhere within the country or further afield in different locations. But then more importantly, there's normally some standard set that comes from legal and from HR, which is around tax questions. So there's normally a certain amount of days. I think living abroad, my understanding is that after you spend a day over half of a year in a country, you're a tax resident there, if that makes sense. So that would suggest that you could spend up to 5.5 months abroad, but they normally limit it much before that. And it's to do with tax residency questions and, risk mitigation on tax stuff. And so that's why it becomes often a hard no, unless companies are able to use employer of records organizations. So some will take that approach. So they'll work with companies like Deal or Employ and be able to employ people anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. What's the most influential book you've ever read?
Okay. So on a personal level, it's a book called On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I read it at 20 or so, and it had a big influence on me. It's just a book about adventure and getting out there and friendship. It's awesome. Unfortunately, you need to be in your 20s to read it. I've gone back to try and read it since, but it didn't have the same impact. But no, it's interesting. It was written in the 50s, and he would basically get into these kind of crazy moments of writing. And so he would sellotape or glue together all the paper so that he could just continually just bosh it out. And it reads really fast paced in that respect. It's good. And then like business books, I was thinking about this. So I've read a number of business books, and I've read Good to Great and the 4-Hour Workweek, for example, and others. And if you'd asked me to explain the tenets of all of them, I forget. They're in there somewhere.
Yeah.
I think there's this expression about like, if you hear about something, you remember 5%. If you read 15%, and like if you teach it, it's a lot more. And I feel that with my experience with reading has been that it's kind of internal, it all internalizes, but there's not one that I would pick out that I would say, this for that reason.
Yeah.
But that's just me personally. I speak to people who make me envious, who just have a great recollection of the central tenets of lots of different books. So there we go. And something I've started to do recently is when a book sounds interesting, I'll listen to podcasts by the author at the time of release, like 5 or 6, because there's normally a book, you can normally condense it down to a few main arguments, and over like 4 or 5 podcasts, they're explained in different ways. And that's normally enough for me to remember.
Yeah. Your cheat code.
Yeah.
What's one piece of advice you would offer your younger self?
Don't be so cautious. And most importantly, don't worry about what other people think.
Yeah, I love that. Second to last question here as we speed through this. I was reading on your website that for every position you fill, you donate £500 for a cause that you guys care about between the candidate and the employer, I think.
Correct.
And then you list Amnesty International, Climate Works Foundation, Save a Child, and Charity Water. What and why is that important to you and your company, Bright Dynamics?
Okay, that's interesting. You picked up on that. So from my perspective, as an individual, I want to give back. And I think that it's easy just to leave that. In the past, I've left that until next year too often. It's kind of like an idea, but you don't get around to it. And so it got to a point where I said, I want to actually do it. And I want to kind of build it in somehow. And this might be a bit Machiavellian. I thought it's better to do it through the business so that other people can enjoy the process. So the hiring manager feels like they're donating. The candidate feels like they're donating. I feel like I'm donating. And then the question then is, so do you advertise the fact? For example, my dad was very discouraged. He wasn't impressed. He's like, you shouldn't talk about these things. It's a bit uncouth. But from my perspective, I actually think the opposite. I think that human beings, we're very affected by what others around us do. And I think if 50% of people regularly did voluntary work, for example, and, you went to a party and you compared notes on the different types of voluntary work you did, very quickly, everyone will be doing voluntary work, if that makes sense. And because nobody does it, so I think actually that it's a positive thing to advertise.
Yeah, the net effect of that is larger. Not only is it £500 being donated, but then you're including other people in the process who might then later start their own business and then implement that idea. And then the charity and giving gets greater.
Yeah.
John, it's been a lovely conversation. If listeners want to leverage your expertise or use your company or just connect, where can they go find you at?
So LinkedIn is the best place to find me. And alternatively, brightdynamics.co.uk is the company website. And I'm always open to a conversation with anybody and everybody from the pre-sales world. So, feel free to reach out.
All right, John, appreciate you making the time for me. It's been a great conversation. Looking forward to continuing watching your journey from afar.
Thanks, Randall. It's been amazing. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
And that wraps up today's conversation on the Randall Osché Podcast. Thanks again to our guest for sharing their time, knowledge, and lessons with us. If the episode brought you any value, the best way to support the show is to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform. That helps us reach more people like you. You can also visit podcast.randallosché.com for blog posts, full transcripts, and other episode resources. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep moving forward.